Okay, so welcome to this session introducing PPP2, and PPP2 stands for PARS Playwork Practice Level 2. And this is an exciting venture for us at Common Threads. We've been around for 20 years, actually, in September, this September. And we've been developing Playwork practice since we started for those 20 years. But recently what's happened is that the model of Playwork practice that I developed as part of my PhD research has really sort of taken off and is now being used right around the world. And one of the things that people were telling us about this model of practice and the courses that we were running is actually people wanted some sort of accreditation. They wanted some certification, some external validation, not just a certificate of attendance, to show that they really do know what they're doing when they put Playwork practice into their settings. Because as we all know, it's really easy to just say, well, we're doing Playwork. And the head teacher looks at you and says, not in my school, you're not. And if you haven't got any really good arguments for what you're doing, if you can't explain what you're doing, and very often in Playwork what you're not doing and why, then actually that makes your life very, very difficult, because you then end up having to do things that are perhaps contrary to what you would rather do. You might end up having to stop the children doing some things that you want to allow them to be able to do. And basically you also want to be able to look like a professional. You want to be able to say, no, actually, I appreciate your model of practice, I understand that, but we've got a different model of working, we've got a different ethos, and we've got a different perspective, and let's have a conversation as two professionals. So when I started my PhD research, I wasn't looking to develop a model of practice. That came as a result of some historical research I was doing into the Adventure Playground pioneers, where Playwork started in the UK over 70 years ago. So it was almost an accident, really, that this model of practice came about. But what happened was people started to use it, and people started to say, oh, Shelley, this works. Can we have some more of this? Can I teach it to people in my setting? Or can I take it back to my country? And gradually, things have just spread and grown. So just to give you a little bit of an insight into this model and how it's actually grown. We talk about now the PARS community, and actually some of our trainers talk about the PARS family, which is lovely, actually. We are now, Common Threads is now an NCFE International Award Centre. Now, NCFE might not mean much to people outside the UK, but they are one of the leading awarding bodies in the UK. And so that means that we have to abide by lots of policies and procedures, and we have to produce high quality training and delivery materials in order to meet their standards. So there are external quality assurers, if you like. I'll talk a little bit more about NCFE and what that means for individual learners later on. But going back to this PARS community, we now have 23 trainers all over the world. We've got one in Australia, we've got one in New Zealand, we've got several in mainland China and Hong Kong. And people are just sort of really finding the value in this model and wanting to teach it to other people, which has been fabulous from my point of view, because, you know, as I said, it was never really designed to be used. One of the interesting things about PARS is that although it was originally designed from a Playwork perspective and to be able to explain what Playwork is, it's used now in lots and lots of different places and different types of settings that we would see as sort of non-traditional Playwork settings. So you don't have to be called a Playworker to use PARS, and you don't have to run a Playwork setting. because what we found in all these different countries is it works in places like zoos, it works in hospitals. And what we often talk about is that you put your PARS hat on and you take your PARS hat off. So you have to decide when you're going to use PARS Playwork practice and when you don't, and that's fine. You don't have to have a job that's called a playworker to be able to do that. One of the interesting things is we're seeing more and more parents using PARS Playwork practice as well. So we've got training programs for parents in Hong Kong at the moment and also in mainland China, because again, you can't be a PARS practitioner all the time when you're a parent, because your kids would never be fed and they never go to school and they'd spend an awful lot of fun time, but really they'd be very poorly fed and they wouldn't get much sleep. But what we say all the time is decide when it's your PARS practice time, when you're going to be acting as a PARS practitioner, put that PARS hat on, use the model, then take your PARS hat off, and then you can be a teacher or a parent or a zookeeper. It doesn't really matter, as long as you don't mix the two up, because they are quite distinct and different ways of practicing. Out of school care is a huge area for us. We've got out of school programs using this model in Canada, in Australia, in the UK. Yeah, it works very well in out of school care too. So as I said, people wanted accredited programs, and so we've now got accreditation at levels 2 and 4. And level 4, to give you some idea, in the UK is the equivalent to the first year of a university. And that's what we train all of our practitioners, our trainers and assessors. So all of our trainers and assessors are qualified at level 4 in PARS, so that they really do have that in-depth understanding, first year of a degree, of what they're talking about, because it is quite a complicated model to really understand in depth. So we want people to have that level of qualification before they teach others. We are at the moment working on accreditation for level 3 as well. Level 2 would be an assistant worker, somebody who is supervised by other people in the settings in the UK. We also have a level 1 introduction session, but that is not accredited. That's a 6-hour quick introduction, which we haven't had accredited and don't intend to. The other part of the PARS community is that we're developing publications, we're developing research, we have SIGs, which are special interest groups, which anybody can join. You don't have to be a PARS practitioner to do that. And we have the International Journal of Playwork Practice, which also has practice reports in from practitioners. So it is a peer-reviewed academic journal, but it also has practitioner articles in it, and we're very pleased with that. That's online, it's open access, anybody can read the articles in that journal, and we're very pleased to be able to do that, to support the development of knowledge in the PARS community. So PPP2 is just one of the things that we do in this huge international adventure that we're having at the moment. We have had people from lots of different countries taking part in PPP2, which we're very pleased about, so that we know that it works in different international settings. The process is qualified by NCFE, our awarding body. And what that means is that we have a training team, we have an assessment team, and then we have internal quality assurers and a lead IQA, whose job it is to make sure that your work has met a certain standard. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So there is an assessment process, which is separate to the training program. And then, as I said, it is accredited by NCFE, NCFE certificate courses. And so anybody who passes PPP2 receives a accredited certificate from NCFE. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Playwork, it was invented in the adventure playgrounds just after the Second World War in the UK. So it has a pretty long tradition. And very early on, it sort of spread around the world in different ways and different formats. And we describe Playwork in the PARS community as an alternative approach to working with children in their leisure time. So Playwork is not education, it's not therapy, it's not socialization, it's not another form of exercise. It is a very different approach to working with children. We also sometimes describe PARS as a complementary approach to Playwork. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about you can be a parent and use PARS. You can be a zookeeper and use PARS. You can be a therapist and use PARS. It's just that when you use PARS, then you have to set aside all the other ideas and theories and philosophies from your other ways of thinking about children. And that's one of the things that we teach you to do on PPP2. Playwork is a profession in the UK. There are national occupational standards for Playwork, and it's recognised in different government documents and that sort of thing. Yeah, to be a play worker in the UK would be a recognised role. But as I said, you don't have to be a play worker to use PARS. We've got many more people using PARS who are not play workers in our community than we have who actually are play workers. So PARS is a little bit different to what some of you may have already understood as Playwork, for those of you who know what Playwork is. I'm just going to explain a little bit of the differences, and so you know what this program is about. One of the differences is that PARS actually is a model. It looks like a model. It's not just a load of words. Sometimes people use words on to describe, you know, a model, but actually it's not. It is a model. It does look like something, and it has within it a philosophy. It has 7 theories. It has 5 methods, and it has 12 techniques. What we do on PPP2 is we introduce you to that model. Now at level 2, which takes place in within 12 hours, we can't really get you in-depth knowledge of the PARS model. But the level 2 covers all of those philosophy, theories, methods and techniques to help you to start to use them in your practice. One of the other differences about PARS from the way that people often understand Playwork is that PARS was developed from research. As I said earlier, I looked at the theory and practices of the adventure playground pioneers, and I tried to work out what it was that they were doing. So though we differ from traditional Playwork in many ways, we are rooted in the practices of the adventure playground workers from the 1950s and 60s. And again, some people hear me say that and they say, oh, well, I can't do it then because I work in a school. But that is not the case. We find that this model works as well in schools and hospitals and prisons as it does in adventure playgrounds. And we have practitioners in all of those settings using PARS in different countries around the world. And that's because PARS is a practice, okay? So in traditional Playwork, people talk a lot about play and how important play is. Some of you might be surprised to hear that we don't talk about that at all in PARS because PARS is a practice which is used by adults. So in PARS, we're not interested in what children do for reasons I'll come to in a minute. What we're interested in is what you do as adults to help children to have some time and space that they can use from their own perspectives and for their own purposes. Okay, now that might be play, and very often it will be, But sometimes, do you know what? Children just want to sit and chat with their mates. Sometimes they just want to look at the sky. Sometimes they just want to run around screaming. Sometimes they even want to do their homework because it's too noisy at home. And actually, the after school club, for example, gives them a quiet space that they can do that in. So PARS is really about how we as adults respond to what children want from their own time and their own space. So, and it's an evidence-based practice. So all the time we're talking about research, we're thinking about how we demonstrate what practitioners are doing, and we're publishing research on that now fairly constantly. So there's an evidence base behind the practice that makes it easier for people to say, well, I'm a PARS practitioner, and that means this, and also it's backed up by these publications. Oh, hello, I didn't know they bounced. That's fun. So PARS has three main differences with other approaches to play work. One of them I've just talked about already. It's the practice. It's the fact that PARS practice is evidence-based. PARS practice is also about the adults and not the children. And that's really important, because what we do in PPP2 is we ask you to think about what you're doing. We ask you to reflect on your ideas as a practitioner, your application of the models and the philosophy, how you've used the methods and the techniques. And even at level 2, that's quite a reflective and intense experience, actually, because being a PARS practitioner means you have to be quite honest about what it is that you're doing. And you also have to be able to say, and we do this all the time, oops, got that wrong. Oops, read the wrong way with that. Okay, well, let's try it differently again. Some people find that quite difficult, because as adults, we're always used to being right. Yeah, we're always used to having the answer, and we're always used to doing things our way. And what PARS asked us to do in our practice is to think, there might be another way of seeing this. The kids might have a different view, and we perhaps need to do things differently next time. We also have a slightly different take on play. As I said, PARS isn't about play, because that's what the children do, and PARS is about what the adults do. But in the PARS model, we have a different definition of play to the traditional Playwork definition of play. And some of you might be familiar with play as freely chosen, personally directed, and intrinsically motivated, which is the sort of definition that's used normally in Playwork. In our model of practice, play is defined as play that bubbles up from the child instead of as a result of adult directives. I love that. I just think it sums up perfectly this idea of, if we give children time and space to be kids, then they will come up with the ideas themselves. They will come up with the innovation and the creativity, rather than adults bossing them about all the time. And that really goes to the heart of what it is that we're interested in PARS. Some of you may have also heard this idea of, play workers as facilitating play. We don't deal with that in PARS, actually, because of that definition. Because if a child can come up with the ideas, and a child can direct their own play, and a child can develop their own play, then there should be very little need for adults to facilitate anything. Sometimes we have to get involved, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because that's at the heart of what this model is about. But that definition of play as bubbling up from inside the child is really at the heart of our philosophy about children and childhood. Because the philosophy in PARS is not about play, it's about the need for kids to be kids. So there's a lot of concerns at the moment about children being treated as mini adults, children growing up too fast, the impact of technology, children being exposed to far too much too early. At the heart of PARS, we see childhood as a distinct time where children are creative, active and engaged. They've got short attention spans. They're curious. They're alive in the moment. They can self-regulate, and they should be happy. But very often, sometimes childhood doesn't pan out like that for some children. And our purpose in PARS, if you like, our aim in PARS is to be able to give children some time and space to be kids from their own perspectives. So not always following the adult directives, not always trying to fit into the adult world, but for us adults to be able to create some time and space where the child's world is the most important thing, and how the child sees the world and what they want to do, and their experiences are completely different to adults, but actually prioritized by the adults in that setting. So our philosophy in PARS goes much wider than play, because if you think about it logically, there's all sorts of things that kids might want to do after school, for example, that isn't play. Maybe they're just tired. Maybe they just want to flop down on a beanbag and just hum. Yeah, maybe they just want to read a book. Maybe they want to cook something because they've always fancied having a go at cooking and they're not allowed to do that at home. There's a lot of things that children want to do with their own time that actually we can help them with and support them with and allow them to do, create that time and space for them to do it, that isn't play. So that's why the broader philosophy of PARS is about children and childhood, children seeing and experiencing things differently to the adult world around them, the need for children to do that, and that us as PARS practitioners creating that space for children to be able to experience things on their own terms and from their own perspectives. So the aim of PARS, as I said, is not about providing play, facilitating play, all those things that you might have heard other play workers talking about. It's actually to compensate children for the presence of adults in their time and space by avoiding adulteration wherever possible, so that children can do what they need to do and not what adults think they ought to do, as Abernethy said in 1968, and it's still very, very true today, that quote. And that's really important to have that broader view of what this model is about, because the logic basically goes, well, if children weren't in supervised settings, if they weren't in after school clubs, if they weren't in zoos, if they weren't in summer camps, then actually they may well be out of the gaze of adults somewhere, maybe at home, maybe out on the streets, maybe in the woods, and there wouldn't really be any adults to say, oh, don't do that, stop that, pack that in, no, you can't dig there, and all the rest of it. And so what we're trying to do as PARS practitioners is we're trying to be realistic about the fact that children do need to spend their time in supervised settings very often. But as PARS practitioners, how can we make that time and space as child-friendly as possible? And how can we try and see things from the child's perspective and take into account that maybe they have different priorities and different perspectives to us as adults, and to prioritize those different perspectives wherever possible. So this word adulteration is really interesting because in traditional play work, it's used in the context of play. So adulteration would mean, in normal English, it would mean to spoil something or to contaminate it. And in traditional play work, it's used to warn people against taking over children's play. But in the PARS model, we're thinking about adulteration of children's time and space. So it's not just the play, it's the fact that, for example, they've got 3 hours in the after school club, and that 3 hours could be used for children's maximum benefit to do what they want to do in their own free time. However, as we know, very often us adults are very good at filling up children's time. Here's an activity, now come and sit and sing in a circle. Now we're all going to play a game. Yeah, oh, you go on that table and you go on that table. In this model, we would say, hang on a minute, children need some time off from the adult world. Children need to make decisions for themselves. Children need to be able to do things from their own perspectives. And maybe they don't want to do that activity. Maybe they don't all want to play a game. Maybe they just need some time and space to sort themselves out and make their own decisions. So in this model, we talk about adulteration. Whoops, I've lost my, oh no, it's here. We'll come back to all of this. There we go. We talk about adulteration as the prioritization of adult ideas and concerns over children's ideas and concerns. Okay. I'll give you a lovely example here. This is actually from one of our PPP2 passes. There's a lady who's passed her PPP2 now. A child set up a shop with books from the bookcase with pieces of paper laid out with prices on it. She left the area to go to the toilet. Thinking they were rubbish, an adult went over and started to pick the pieces of paper up. So in that example, we can see very clearly why PARS exists and what we're interested in. Because a child has got their own ideas and their own perspectives on what it is they're doing and why. And an adult has got another perspective. Oh, look at that over there. That's terribly untidy. There's nobody around. I'll just go and clear it up. Okay. Without considering that actually the child might think, right, now I'm going to the loo, and when she's in the loo, she might think, the next stage of my game is, and she wants to come out of the loo and get on with the next stage of her game, and it's gone. Because an adult simply hasn't thought, oh, actually, there's a different way of thinking about this. Hang on a minute. Yeah, we've just gone blindsided with our adult ideas of being tidy, and actually just ruined the child's game because it's not there anymore when they come out of the toilet. So what we're trying to do in PARS all the time is to think about, are we adulterating? But of course, it's not quite as simple as saying, don't adulterate. And in traditional playwork, you'll often hear this idea of no approach, no need. You know, just don't get involved. That's not the approach we take in PARS, because what we recognize is that sometimes you do have to adulterate. Okay, kids have to go home at the end of a session, so you're going to have to say stop what you're doing. Yeah, sometimes there's safety issues. Yeah, so you are going to have to say no, sorry, you can't do that, or can you do that another way? Yeah, sometimes kids genuinely need help. Yeah, so and therefore you are going to get involved. So what we don't say in PARS is we never get involved and it's bad practice to get involved. What the PARS model teaches you to do is to make a decision about whether to adulterate or not. Because some adulteration will be necessary and some will be unnecessary. Yeah? So if we go, so here, for example, this is a hot English summer. Yeah. And there's a child in this tunnel. As PARS practitioners, what we might do is just turn around and see this. Now, maybe the child in that tunnel is struggling. Maybe the child who's holding the tunnel is bullying the child in the tunnel. Or it might be that they are just having one of the best games ever and such fun. The interesting thing is that as the adults who's just turned around to see that, we don't know. Okay. And so we've got two standard responses, haven't we? We've got the traditional Playwork response that says, leave them alone, they're having fun. Possibly, but that child might genuinely be in trouble, particularly if we can't hear what's going on from the child in the tunnel. And the second adult response might be, stop that, pack that in, that's not what that piece of equipment was used for, get out there immediately, go and play something different. PARS helps us to take a middle way, a different approach, because what the PARS model teaches us is methods and techniques, the theories, to be able to assess whether adulteration in this case is appropriate or not appropriate. Now, the interesting thing is that, of course, it's only you as a practitioner who can make that decision, because I can't tell you whether to intervene with a child who's waving a stick, because actually that child might have good reasons or they might not. It's only you as the practitioner on the ground who can put into practice the theories, methods and the techniques to think about whether really you do need to adulterate on safety grounds or to help the child or other reasons, or whether actually you're going to leave them alone because swinging a stick around their head is the best fun ever. They're not doing any harm, and actually that's what they want to do with their time. So what the PARS model does is try to bridge the gap, if you like, between the adult world and the child world, so that we're making, as adults, conscious decisions about whether to adulterate or not. And sometimes, of course, it's not that we just don't know what's going on from a child's perspective. It's actually that there's a culture clash. I'm the adult, you're the child, do as I say, this is how it's going to be. And so in PARS, what we do is we question that and we say, hang on a minute, this is a child's time and space, this is a child's free time, let's help them to see things, let's try and see things from their perspective and not always take the standard adult approach to situations like this. This is a play space that I set up in a school a while back, and I put a load of loose parts on the playground, and the children decided to use them for swords and play soldiers with them. Can you imagine the delight on the head teachers and the teachers' faces when this happened in the school playground? But actually, through using PARS, we convinced the teachers that actually we were taking, we were being responsible, we were observing, we were listening, we were reflecting on what was going on. It wasn't just we were saying, oh no, nothing to do with us, the children are having fun, leave them alone. We were actually using our theories, methods and techniques. We could explain what we were doing and how we were keeping an eye on things from the adult perspective, and yet still allow the children to play in a way that they wanted to play and that satisfied their imagination. So I hope that's given you some idea of what PARS is about. We're trying to help adults to make those decisions about when adulteration is necessary and when it's not necessary, and when we're just doing it out of the need to be the standard adult and to give the standard adult response. So the aim of PARS is to compensate children for the presence of adults by avoiding adulteration wherever possible. So to make those judgments about when we as adults need to get involved and when we don't need to get involved, even though children are doing things that we wouldn't have thought of or in a slightly different way, or that we hadn't anticipated that they would do. So PARS is a dynamic model. It doesn't say if a child waves a stick around, do this. What it says is, here's a philosophy, theories, methods and techniques for you to put into practice in the here and now in your setting to make a decision about when adulteration is necessary and when it's unnecessary. So it's different to that normal sort of hands-off, don't do anything Playwork approach. So I'm just going to spend the last 3 minutes of this presentation just talking about PPP2 qualification. We've got the aim of the qualification on the screen here. As I said earlier, we can't go into much depth in 12 hours in 6 weeks, but we do teach the whole model. So we don't teach a little bit of it and then make you come back for level 3. You do get to learn all of the model, but at an introductory level. And what we want you to be able to do is to describe and develop your PARS practice as a result of this qualification. This is the course content. There's 6 units, and roughly each week we cover 1 unit, although of course it doesn't always work like that. We sometimes go backwards and forwards. There's a lot of interaction. The group always talks a lot, and that's quite interesting, particularly when people are coming from different countries and different workplaces as well. So sometimes we go back and forwards a little bit. It's not always cut and dry that it's 1 unit per course, but per session, but that's how it usually works out. And we cover all the different elements of the model. And this is roughly what the course looks like. Ignore the dates because this was just taken from a previous course. So as I said, we have 6 weeks. We meet for 2 hours once a week. And within that 6 weeks, we have 12 hours of teaching time. There's also an admin support session shortly after you've started the course. We use Dropbox for all of our learning materials and assessments, and sometimes people get in a muddle with that, for example, so they want some help with that. So our training manager is online for a session to help you with that in the admin support session. We also have another separate session, which is Ask the Assessor, and that's when Helen, our lead IQA, comes online for a session, and she deals with any assessment issues that you're having. If you don't understand something in the workbooks, or you're a bit confused by some of the terminology, then Helen deals with that at the Ask the Assessor session. So the 6 weeks are obligatory, they're compulsory. We ask you to do all of those 6 weeks. These 2 sessions, the admin support and Ask the Assessor, you can take them or not take them. Obviously, the more help and support you get, the easier it is for you to do the qualification. The assessments are done by multiple choice assessments, always, sorry, in the teaching sessions, and also you have a workbook. And each week you're asked to complete different parts of the workbook and send that off to the assessor, who is different from Helen. She's the IQA. And the assessor then assesses your work and gives you feedback. Sometimes people pass first time, sometimes they just need to change their language a little bit or maybe write a little bit more. And there's lots of different exercises in the workbook. So sometimes you're asked to do a quiz or something, sometimes you're asked to write a little reflective practice account. So there is practical work in this course as well, because we ask you to take the model into your setting and to apply it, and then to write some just short paragraphs in your workbooks to show us how you've done that. That all takes part over the 6 weeks, and then there is a deadline that's usually 2 or 3 weeks after the last date of the course, at which point people then must submit all of their work, including any resubmissions. And then that goes to Helen, our IQA, and our assessor, who then assess and verify your work. And then if you pass, it gets sent to NCFE for accreditation. The total amount of hours we expect you to be engaged on the course is 25 hours. So it's roughly double the teaching time. And that's the practice that you do, it's the assessments, it's any reading you choose to do. There isn't any reading for this course because it's not an academic course, but you might decide to go and read up on some stuff as well, or to do some research on the internet. We would expect you to commit about 25 hours PQT, that means total qualification time. So that sort of covers the basics of PPP2. Here's all of our social media. We've also got a YouTube channel, and there's a lovely video on there that I would encourage everybody to look at. We recently did a bid for funding from Lego, and some of the MAD training team decided to make a video about PARS as part of the bid, and it's a lovely little short video which I would encourage you to go and have a look at. There's lots of other social media there as well. There's also a video on YouTube about our level 4 programme by Janet Scott, who's the Playwork specialist at NCFE, our awarding body. So if you want to know more about the level 4, do go and have a look at that.